really funny.
We had First time I was ever presented to an audience in my life was in San Francisco. I found out backstage it was customary to have somebody get up and introduce you. Well, I said, I don't have anybody. They said, well, go find you somebody. Well, they pulled some poor unfortunate out of the audience. They said, do you know Sam Clemens? He said, yeah. Come on up and introduce him. Well, as I stood helplessly backstage, this man gets up in front of my very first audience, and he says,
I only know two things about Sam Clemens. One is that he's never been in the penitentiary. And the other one is that I don't know why.
Well, I suppose that lawyer was just trying to pay me a compliment. We all love compliments. All lawyers and humorists, and burglars, and all of us in the trade. We all love compliments. I believe the plan of the newspaper is good concerning compliments. If you cannot get a compliment any other way, pay yourself one. I can do that. In fact, I feel one coming on right now. I can stand right here and say, there are two most remarkable men in the world. Rudyard Kipling is one. I'm the other one. Between us, we cover all knowledge. Kipling knows everything that can be known. I know the rest. I was once paid a compliment by a little Montana girl. Little Montana girl. She was admitted into a room where there was a very, very large portrait of me up on the wall. And she walked over to it and she stared at it fixedly for some time. And then finally she said, we've got a picture of John the Baptist too. Only this one hasn't got a halo. You see, there was a portrait of me, and she thought, never mind. A little Montana girl reminds me of a little girl down in Tennessee who was told by her mama and her papa that they were going to be leaving that beloved little home of theirs in Tennessee, and they were going to be moving to the state of Missouri, which is my home state. And on the day that they were going to be leaving, and a little Tennessee girl goes skittering out into the front yard. And she turns around and she says, "Goodbye, house, I'm going to Missouri. Goodbye, green grass, I'm going to Missouri. Goodbye, trees, I'm going to Missouri. Goodbye, God, I'm going to Missouri." As I was waiting backstage to come on and talk to you, two little ladies came walking down the hall, and I don't know how they got back there, but they were wandering around trying to find their way. And they ran into me. And they quickly acted like they didn't know me. And then they kept on walking by. And when they thought I was out of earshot, the one turned to the other one and she says, "I think that's Mr. Clemens." The other one says, "Oh, yes, my dear, yes. That's Mark Twain. He's one of the world's greatest authors." I'm always sorry to hear my name mentioned. Being one of the world's great authors, they have such a sad habit of dying. Chaucer's dead. So is Spencer. And so is Milton. And so is Shakespeare. I'm not feeling too good myself. Same two little ladies, as they were going back up the hall, must not think I hear very well, because, well, the one turned back to the other, says, "I wonder why he always wears that white suit." Well, I tell you, ladies, wherever you are, why I wear these white suits. You see, I have traveled all over the world. And I have hobnobbed with savages, and with nobility, and with everything in between. Wherever I go, there's always one thing stands out in my mind, and it is this. Clothes make the man. Naked people have little or no influence in society. At least they didn't in my day. Yeah. Well, I wish to thank you for attending these services in my behalf this evening. I almost missed them myself. Came by railroad, you know. It was one of those kinds of trains that goes steadily for 15 minutes. and it has to stop and rest for 3/4 of an hour. Seeing that we were going nowhere fast, I finally approached the conductor, and I suggested to him that we take the cowcatcher off the front of the locomotive, and that we put it on the back of the caboose. Because at the rate of speed we were traveling, we weren't about to catch any cows. There's nothing to keep him from climbing aboard on the rear end. He didn't take my suggestion too kindly. And so I realized might as well be philosophical and settle down and make the best of a bad situation. So I closed my eyes, was going to get some much-needed sleep. I didn't get a wink of sleep, because a man came on board that train. He brought with him a dog. That dog barked, and it barked, and it barked. Steadily. There's nothing. Till he died. It was one of those. It was one of those. Long, low, homely dogs with little tiny short legs. Looked like parentheses turned out the wrong way. And his belly was dragging on the ground amidships. Well, it's built a lot on the same plan as a bench. Only I thought the plan was structurally weak, because you needed another set of parentheses right there in the middle. That's all right. The owner was proud of that dog. Oh, he was proud of that dog. He was as proud of that dog as a mother is of its child when it's an idiot. Said it was a famous dog. Said it had won prizes in dog shows all over the world. Said whenever he took that dog out on the street, people stopped and stared at it. Well, I didn't want to hurt his feelings, and so I didn't tell him what I was thinking. But I was thinking, why, so you go and take a long, low, homely dog like that and waddle him down the street anywhere in the world and don't charge anything, people will stop and stare at him. But I didn't say that. That's all right, Joe. I finally arrived, and here I am. You know, when I was a good deal younger, perhaps 70, I used to go out on a lot of lecture tours, lecturing for money. That's a good deal similar to politics. Good way to pad your bank account without ever having to work a day in your life. But every silver cloud has a dark lining. My dark lining came in the form of small town newspaper reporters whose only reason for existing is to interview some famous and innocent person. Like, for example, myself. And when the interview is over, they runs back to the newspaper office and they improve you. And they improve you. And they improve you. To the final results, you could go over the printed results the next morning with a divining rod, and you'd never find yourself. Well, I always had a running battle of wits going to those yahoos. I remember one afternoon when I was out on a raid in Waukegan, Illinois. There came a knock at my hotel room door. I was feverishly engaged in a project. Didn't want to be disturbed, so I ignored it. But the knock came again. This time so loud that it woke me up. And so I says, "Come in, confound it, come in." Well, a man walked in, and I eyed him over cautiously. He was wearing a fried egg straw hat, a checkered suit that was too short and too tight. He had a stenographer's notepad in one hand and a pencil in the other. And he looked down at me, and he said, "Mr. Twain, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Perkins, and I work for the Waukegan Daily Thunderstorm and War Whoop Gazette. And I've come to interview you." "You've come to what?" "I've come to interview you." Ladies and gentlemen, I wasn't feeling very bright that particular afternoon. My powers of observation and concentration seemed to be a bit under a cloud. I realized right then and there if I was ever going to win this verbal battle of wits, I was going to have to confuse that reporter beyond all hope. So the interview began. How do you spell it?
How do you spell what?
Interview.
What do you want to spell it for?
I don't want to spell it. I want to go look it up and see what it means.
Oh, well, you spell it I-N-T-E-R. E-R. Have to forgive me, Mr. Twain, for I don't mean any harm in the world, but you know, you somehow don't look as intelligent as I'd expected you would. No harm intended, of course.
Oh, don't mention it. It has frequently been said that I'm quite remarkable at not looking very intelligent. People always speak of it with a great deal of rapture.
I can imagine that. But to get down to this interview business, you see, it's all the custom nowadays to interview anybody who has become sufficiently notorious, such as you have. Will you allow me to ask you certain questions that are calculated to bring out the salient points in your public and private lives?
poor memory.
Well, that's all right, just so you do the best you can.
Oh, I will. I'll put my whole mind to it.
Thanks. Are you ready to begin?
Take it.
How old are you?
19. In June.
Really? I would have taken you to be much older than that.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Where were you born?
In Missouri.
And when did you first begin to write?
In 1836.
How can that be if you're only 19 now?
I don't know. Does seem rather peculiar, doesn't it?
Does indeed. Whom do you consider to be the most remarkable man you ever met?
Oh, I don't know. I suppose Benjamin Franklin.
You never could have met Benjamin Franklin if you're only 19 now.
Now listen, if you know more about me than I do, what did you ask me for?
Oh, no harm intended. Just a suggestion, nothing more. How did you happen to meet Mr. Franklin?
Well, I happened to be at his funeral one day. And he asked me to make less noise.
Good heavens, if you were at his funeral, how could he care if you made any noise or not?
Oh, he was always a very particular man that way.
But still, if you were his funeral, he must have been dead. And if he was dead, how could he...
I didn't say he was dead.
Wasn't he dead?
Well, some said he was. Then again, some said he wasn't.
What did you think?
It wasn't any of my business. It wasn't my funeral.
But still, if he was... If you were at his... Oh, I can see we'll never get to the bottom of that one now. One final question on Mr. Franklin. What was it about him that made him seem to you to be the most remarkable man you ever met?
Well, it was a trifle, really. Not one man in 50 would have noticed it at all. You see, when the funeral sermon was over, and the procession was all lined up and ready to head out for the boneyard, and the body was arranged in the hearse, he said he wanted to have one last look at the scenery. And so he climbed up and rode with the driver. And then the two...
Thanks, I believe that's all we need on Mr. Benjamin Franklin. What is the date of your birth?
October 31st.
October 31st.
Monday, October.
Monday, October 31st.
1593.
What? Why, that's impossible. That would put you around. Hot. Take away. That would put you around 300 years old. How do you account for that?
I don't account for it at all.
Well, that's a terrible discrepancy.
Have you noticed that, too? Many times it has seemed to me like a terrible discrepancy, but I just somehow could not make up my mind. How quick you are to notice such a little detail as that.
Thank you very much. Have you or had you any brothers or sisters?
Yes, I did. No, I did. Yes, I did. No, I don't. I don't remember.
Why, that's the silliest thing I ever heard in my life. Who's that a picture of there on the dresser right behind you? Ain't that a picture of a brother of yours right there on the dresser behind you?
Oh, yes, now that you mention it, yes. That's a picture of a brother of mine. That's William. Bill, we used to call him. Oh, why? Isn't it? I never could tell. There was always a great mystery about it.
Oh, that's sad. Very sad. He disappeared then.
Yes, he did. In a gentle sort of way. We buried him.
You buried him without knowing if he was dead or not?
Oh, no, not yet. No. He was dead enough, all right. He was always pretty dead, old Bill.
Now, I must confess I don't understand. Now, you say somebody was dead and somebody was buried. Now, where's the mystery?
Well, that's it. Yes, that's it exactly. You see, we were twins, defunct and I, you see. And we got mixed up in the bathtub when we was only 2 days old. And one of us got drowned. We never could tell which one of us it was. Some think it was Bill. Some think it was me.
What did you think?
Oh, I would give whole worlds to know. This solemn and awful mystery has cast a gloom over my whole life. But I'll tell you a secret now. which I have never told another human being. One of us had a peculiar birthmark, a very large mole on the back of the left hand. That is the child of the drought. That brought the interview to a screaming conclusion. Perkins tried to go through the door twice without opening it. The headlines read,
Deranged old man loose in local hotel. Harmless if not roused up.
And down in the bottom corner in very small print you could read, reporter goes away for a long rest. How many of you here, by a show of hands, are boys? 1, 2, 3. Didn't do very well. Well, we'll try it another way. How many of you here, by show of hands, have at one time or another been boys? 7, 8. We did a little better. And I suppose the rest of you have had a great deal to do with boys. Boys are important people. I used to be a boy. I was a good boy, too. I was a very good boy. I was the best boy in my whole class back there in Hannibal. Come to think of it, I was the best boy in my whole school. Or for that matter, I was the best boy in town. Come to think of it, I was the best boy in the whole state of Missouri. But I don't realize why it is that I never heard anybody say that of me. I always recognized it. Even my dear old mother, rest her soul. Every summer they'd bring me home 3 or 4 times, dragged fresh out of the Mississippi River, more dead than alive. And some enemy of the human race would pump me back to life again and get me to running all right, and then away I'd go. And finally, one of the neighbor ladies came over and saw my mother hanging out clothes on the line, and she said, Mrs. Clemens, you're getting a mite worried about young Sam. Aren't you afraid he's going to drown one of these times? And my dear old mother just looked at her and said, oh, no, you can't drown someone who was born to hang. But as good a boy as I was all the time improving and repenting. Why, I remember the first time I ever stole a watermelon. It was... I didn't mean to say stole, no. Not that. It was, not stole. First time I ever withdrew a watermelon. Retired it from circulation, no. It was the first time I ever extracted a watermelon. There. That's the term I'm looking for. Extracted. Yes, extracted. You see, we do not extract our own teeth, do we? Wasn't my own watermelon I extracted either.
I extracted that watermelon from the farmer's wagon whilst he was inside negotiating with a customer. And I carried it to the deepest, darkest recesses of the Hannibal lumber yard. And there I broke it open. It was a green watermelon. You know, when I saw that, I began to feel sorry. Boy, it seemed to me I had done wrong. I knew what a boy ought to do who had extracted a green watermelon like that one. Quick, I knew. Deep down inside, there's only one thing going to make me feel all right again. And that was restitution. So I picked up the biggest pieces of that green watermelon, and I carried it back to the farmer's wagon, and I restored the watermelon. And I made him give me a good one in its place. I told him he ought to be ashamed of himself. Going around working off his worthless green watermelons on poor unsuspecting customers like me. Had to depend on him, I told him if he didn't shape up, I'd see to it he didn't get any more of my business. Why, that farmer was as repentant as a revivalist/convert. He swore to me that he would never carry another green watermelon if he and his entire family had to starve for it. And then he got into his wagon and he said, "Giddy up," and he drove off. A better man. All I got out of it was a watermelon. Way back when I was a boy, at least part of every one of my summer vacations used to be spent in upstate Missouri, on a farm which belonged to my uncle, John Quarles. Oh, what a dreamy, enchanted place that farm was. We would walk down those dusty lanes. We didn't have to wear any shoes. Didn't have to wear any stockings. When we went skinny dipping, we didn't have to wear anything. I can remember it still. Long about twilight. Walking down those dusty old lanes. Listening to the little creatures skittering along in the underbrush as we steered them. Used to catch bats, put them in our pockets, and take them home to Aunt Patsy. Tell her we had a surprise for her, and make her reach in to get them. She was prejudiced against bats. And so we went out and got some garter snakes. And we put them in her sewing basket, put the lid on, and when she would sit down with that basket on her lap and take the lid off, and they'd
drop out onto her lap. It always disordered her mind. She was prejudiced against snakes, too. We were lucky with children on that farm because we had not only one uncle, we had two. A white one and a black one. Old Uncle Daniel was an old white-haired nigger slave. Belonged to my Uncle John, at least that's what he said. But we children, we always allowed it was the other way around. They loved that old black man. Loved him a lot because he had time for children. He took us places, did things with us, and taught us things. We loved him. He loved us. He used to tell us stories. Story after story after story. Didn't matter we'd heard them all 15,000 times. That wasn't the important part. It was the love which transpired in the process. I remember every evening after the chores were all taken care of, and the supper was all taken care of, we children would scamper up those loft stairs. And we'd get our nightshirts on. And then we'd come back downstairs and we'd sit down in front of that huge fireplace and watch the flames going up the chimney. And we'd scratch the old hound dog's back and he'd stretch and yawn and he'd see. Old Uncle Dan would stand up in front of us children and he'd tell us stories. Story after story after story. And then, as a matter of time, when the fire had died down into glowing embers, so it was very dark in the room, we knew it was time for the ghost story. That's when we scooted a little closer to the fire. That's when we hugged the dog a little tighter till he growled at us. We tucked those old nightshirts up as far down our legs as we could. Tried to just make them swallow us right up because it was kind of a good tingling feeling. And we'd look in all the dark corners suspiciously. We'd listen to the wind whistling around outside the rafters. It was as quiet as a grave. We were all watching Uncle Daniel up there, getting ready to tell us the story of the golden arm.
Well, now, children, once upon a time, there's this old man, and he lived with his old wife named Elvira out there in an old house out on the edge of town. And Elvira, she had a golden arm. And that golden arm, children, went right from her shoulder right on down to the tip of her little finger. Loved that golden arm more than she loved her own arm. And every night before they go to bed, children, she'd say to that old man, "If I dies before you does, you got to promise me that you'll bury me with my golden arm." to promise it. Every night, children. Bye-bye. Elvira took sick. Before long, she died. That old man, he done just like he promised, too. He buried Elvira with a golden arm. Then one night, just before midnight, he was laying there in his bed listening to the wind blow. And he's thinking about all the problems he got. He said, how am I going to get some money? I don't got no money. Can't pay the rent. Can't pay none of my bills. I don't got no food. Can't buy no liquor. Pretty quick, children. An evil thought came into his mind. He started thinking about the golden arm. He started thinking about all the things he could buy with that golden arm. Got up out of the bed, and he put on his overcoat, and he grabbed his shovel, and he headed on out to the graveyard. And when he got there to the graveyard, he looked around, and he see that fresh mound of dirt where Elvira was supposed to be buried. And he could see it in the moonlight. And he took that shovel. He dug. He dug. And finally he got down to Elvira, and he cut off her golden arm, and he picked it up and put it inside of his coat. And he headed on out of the graveyard and didn't even fill in the grave. As he got to the edge of the graveyard, he heard the wind. Kept telling himself, it's just the wind. But he hurried on home as fast as he could. And when he got home, he locked all the doors, and he boarded up all of the windows, and he put the golden arm into the bed, and he jumped into the bed with his overcoat and all of his clothes on too, and he pulled the covers up tight around him. But he couldn't get warm. Because the golden arm was as cold as the grave, Jim. And then he heard the wind coming from the direction of the graveyard. was coming up his walk. Oh, and he knew he was in his living room. And he heard the door to his room open. And he knew, children, it was standing above his bed. Dear, don't cry. It's all over. Made you jump, didn't I? You knew what was coming, but you jumped anyway. That's what we did, too. Then you know what that old rascal would do after he finished telling us that story? He'd send us up the stairs to bed. I can remember how dark that room was at night, when I'd wake up in the middle of the night for business. I can remember when all of those old, black, forgotten sins came rushing out of the deepest recesses of my memory, demanding a hearing right then and there. I can remember thinking what a terrible time that was for that kind of business, too. Well, you see, we were all raised Presbyterians. And I knew that when a boy had sinned, it meant the immediate destruction of the entire countryside, cattle and all. Well, I'm going to declare a brief intermission. Terrible death to be talked to death. Besides that, I know what I need to do. And you know what you need to do, and so I suggest we go do it. And I'll be back in about 10 minutes. There is no character, howsoever good and fine, but what it cannot be destroyed by ridicule, howsoever poor and witless. Observe the jackass, for example.
His character's about perfect. He's the choicest among all of the humbler animals. And yet look what ridicule has brought him to. Nowadays, instead of feeling complimented when we are called a jackass, we are left in doubt. Well, I remember just picking up a newspaper just last week in which there was an article about me. And that reporter said the following. He said, Mark Twain's been a writer for 35 years and a jackass for 70. The lesser man might have been outraged by that, but not I. For I knew that newspaper reporter was only referring to me as his brother. There was some truth to that. I suppose we're all a parade of jackasses in some regards, and I'm not only marching in that parade, I'm carrying the banner. I used to be a newspaper reporter. And I was assigned to Washington for a stretch. And speaking of jackasses, it was part of my duty to go on over to Congress. That grand old benevolent national asylum for the helpless. And I reported on the inmates there. I wanted to tell you, I've never seen a body of men with tongues so handy and information so uncertain. Why, they could talk for weeks and never get rid of an idea. If one of those congressmen had been on hand when the Almighty was on the verge of saying, "Let there be light," we never would have had it. When I was a young man studying for the gallows, I went west on the overland stagecoach. To seek my fortune in the silver fields of the Nevada Territory. See, my older brother, Orion, had just been appointed by President Lincoln secretary, yes, of that newly created territory, Nevada. Well, I was young and foolish, and I envied him that strange journey he was going to make. He was going to see deserts and buffaloes and Indians, and maybe get hanged or scalped or something, and write home and tell us all about it. And he was going to see gold and silver mines. And he was going to go on out in the evenings when the work was done and just scoop up several pails full of those nuggets just to have around the house for paperweights. Oh, I envied him. And so when he offered me in cold blood the sublime position of Undersecretary to the Secretary of the Nevada Territory, I was packed and ready to go in an hour. I remember I was armed to the teeth with a pitiful little Smith & Wesson 7-shooter. It carried a bullet about the size of a homeopathic pill. Nonetheless, I fancied it to be a dangerous weapon. Well, I wanted to practice with it for a while, and so I practiced on a cow. And as long as she stood still, she was safe. But as soon as she started wandering around, and I started aiming at other things, she came to grief. Orion, on the other hand, he was packing an old original Allen revolver. It had 6 revolving barrels. They called it a pepper box for a very good reason. When all 6 barrels went off at the same time, which is what the habit was, there was no safe place to stand but behind it. He wanted to practice for a while, too. So I nailed up a deuce of spades on a tree. And he took careful aim and fetched a mule standing 30 yards off to the left. He didn't want to buy the mule, but the farmer came out with a shotgun, which was bigger than the pepper box. They negotiated for a while, and Orion bought the mule at circus horse prices. And at 8 o'clock on a sublime summer morning, we threw our bags up on top of our stagecoach chariot. And we climbed up on top and sprawled out among the mail sacks and lit up our pipes. The driver cracked his whip, and we bowled away into the western horizon. My great journey had begun. There was only 2 other gentlemen on board that stagecoach that I can recall. Gentlemen, I use that term loosely. One, his name was Billy Nye. Now, the thing I remember about Billy Nye was that he was the baldest-headed human being I have ever seen in my life. He only had a little bit of fringe above each ear. We got teasing him about it one night around the fire. And he said to me, he said, this is nothing. You have to see me brother. He ain't even got any fringe. He used to work on a Mississippi River boat out on the decks. One day, he fell overboard. And all the passengers went running to the rail to see if he was ever going to come up again. And sure enough, just as that old bald head of his poked up out of the water, he heard a lady's voice up on the deck say, "Oh, you shameless thing! And with ladies present, go back down and come up the right way!" The other passenger's name was Bemis, an old half-drunk Irishman. The only claim to fame Bemis had was that he got chased up a tree by a buffalo. You see, our chariot broke down out in the middle of the Great Plains, about 300 miles from St. Joe. And out of sheer boredom, we took some extra horses and joined in with a buffalo hunting party that was passing through. Oh, it was a noble sport, galloping along in the dewy freshness of the morning, chasing those hairy beasts. Until it ended in tragedy, for a wounded buffalo bull wheeled around and took off and chased Bemis and his horse for nearly 2 miles. We never saw him again until he came stumbling back into camp that night without the horse. He was pretty sullen for a while, wouldn't talk about it. But finally we got him to tell us what happened. He told us the cockeyed story about how that bull chased him and the horse for quite a ways until finally the horse bucked him off. And he lit at the foot of the only tree in the entire county. And the next thing he knew, he was hanging on to the bark with 4 sets of nails and cursing his luck in a manner that made his breath smell of brimstone. And then he found himself up on top of the topmost limb. Just when he was thinking that he was safe, he looked down, and the buffalo was climbing the tree. It was going to eat him. Well, we looked up and we said, "My goodness, Bemis, what happened then?" "Well, what I done was I unwound the lariat from the pommel of me saddle." "Your saddle? Did you take your saddle up the tree with you, Bemis?" "My saddle? No! Of course not. No man can do that. Of course not. Well, no, what happened was, when the horse bucked me off, the saddle slipped down over his rump, and he kicked it up into the air 300 yards, and it came down, and it lit right next to me in the tree. I wish I may die the death of a dog if I'm not telling you the truth." Go ahead, Bemis. What did you do then?" "Well, like I said, I unwound the lariat from the pommel of me saddle to see how far down it should go. Went exactly 20 feet. I brought it back up and made a hangman's noose out of it, tied the other end around the most substantial limb I could reach. When that buffalo got within reach, I paid that noose down, and I dropped it over the buffalo's head, and then out with me old pepper box and gave him all 6 barrels right in the face. Scared him so bad he lost his balance and fell backwards and hanged himself. I shinnied down the tree and headed back for camp. Well, Bemis, it isn't that we don't believe you. It's just that, well, if there were any proof. Proof? Is it proof you want? Well, did you ever see the horse again? No. Did you ever see the buffalo again? No. Did you ever see the saddle again? No. Well, what more is it you want in the way of proof, then? We all decided that if Bemis wasn't a ding-blasted liar, he just missed it by the skin of his teeth. Well, eventually, we arrived for a stopover in Utah territory. And we pulled into Great Salt Lake City. I'd always promised myself that if I ever got to Utah, I was going to take that old rascal Brigham Young up a tree over this polygamy thing, which was raging hot and heavy. Brigham must have heard I was coming, because when I arrived there, he was not. That's all right, because I did run into another polygamist there in the hotel lobby. This polygamist had 2 wives. Just a beginner. Just a novice. And we got into it hot and heavy for quite some time. Went back and forth and back and forth. Neither one of us would give an inch on this great debate. And then finally this polygamist, he bristles up in my face. And he says, "All right, Mr. Clemens, can you give me any scriptural proof against polygamy?" "Well, can you?"
You can? Well, I'd sure like to hear it.
Very well. Here it is. A man cannot be the servant of two masters. He took a wife in each arm and withdrew in defeat. But I will say this. Those Utahns in general and the citizens of Great Salt Lake City are the most industrious and cleanest people I've ever met. You know that the streets of Great Salt Lake City had tiny little streams of water skittering down the gutters to keep them clean. I was used to those stagnated cesspools in New York City or St. Louis. New Orleans. Great Salt Lake City, there were no orphans wandering the streets, no homeless waifs begging for a handout or for a scrap of food, no drunkards lying in the gutters. In Great Salt Lake City, when a person was in need, he was taken in and his needs were met. Then he was put to work. Most industrious people I have ever seen were in Utah. Utah was the only state that lived up to its great state seal and motto. Great golden beehive with all the bees at work. Of course, my home state of Missouri, we live up to our state seal and our motto. Our state seal is was two drunken bears holding up an empty keg. The motto underneath it reads, "United we stand, divided we fall." If you don't believe me, go to a book and look it up. I didn't get to stay too long in Great Salt Lake City. I did get to go out and visit the foundation of that prodigious temple they were building there. Wonder if they ever finished. It looked like quite a job to me. I didn't get to go out and see the lake. But we did have to leave, and so I said goodbye to Utah for a time. And we struck out over the Great Salt and Alkali Desert. And finally we arrived in Nevada. And we halted at Ragtown, which is situated on the far edge of that Great Salt and Alkali Desert. Territory around there looked a great deal like a singed cat. There wasn't a living creature within 50 miles except for a few stray Indians and some crippled grasshoppers and 4 or 5 buzzards that were out of meat and too feeble to get away. There's a popular notion that the Almighty created Nevada. I think after you have seen it, you'll be inclined to agree with me that the actual work must have been contracted by a wayward branch of the family tree. Eventually, I located in Virginia City, Nevada. I remember when I arrived there, I had a very bad cold. And the lady at the hotel suggested a cure for that cold. She said I should drink a quart of whiskey every 24 hours. Met a man in the dining room. You know, he suggested exactly that same cure. Quart of whiskey every 24 hours. Well, that made half a gallon. I did. And the cold died. For about 2 weeks, I was wishing I could too. I'd never seen such wild, free, magnificent horsemanship in my entire life. As I saw displayed daily in the streets of Virginia City. Oh, it was marvelous. I quickly learned to tell the difference between a horse and a cow. I was burning with anticipation of learning more. I decided I must have a horse. That work. I must have a horse. Well, just as fate would have it, at that very moment, the auctioneer came scouring through the plaza, and he was leading a black beast that had as many humps on it as a camel. It was twice as ugly. That's all right, though. The bid was going at $20. $20 for horse, bridle, and saddle. $20, gentlemen. Well, the man whom I did not know, but later found out, was the auctioneer's brother. Must have noticed the wistful look in my eye. He sidled over next to me, and he said to me, I know that horse very well. Very well. I can guarantee to you, sir, that is no ordinary American horse. That is a genuine Mexican plug. I didn't know what a genuine Mexican plug was. But there was something in that man's way of saying it that made me swear inwardly that I would own one or die. I asked him if it had any other redeeming qualities.
Redeeming qualities? That horse can outbuck anything in America.
No. The bid was now at $24, and I bid $30.
Sold to the sucker in the white, to the gentleman in the white hat.
Horse. I had a horse. Well, I could scarcely contain my exultation as I paid the auctioneer his money. And then we led that beast into the middle of the plaza. And some of the citizens held him down by the ears. Some of the other citizens held him down by the tail, whilst I climbed aboard and grabbed hold of the rudder. At my signal, they let go. That horse put all of his feet together in a bunch. And then he lowered his back down as low as he could go. And he arched it upward and shot me straight up in the air 300 feet. And when I came back down, I almost lit on the high pommel of the saddle. But I didn't have time to worry about that because I was immediately back up in the air again. When I came down again, I was astraddle that horse's neck, hanging on for dear life. You know that horse actually got down and walked around on his front legs for a while, just like a schoolboy out on recess. When he got tired of doing that, he reared up and walked around on his hind legs for a while. Picked his teeth for 5 minutes, just like a member of Congress. When he got tired of doing that, he took to tossing me up in the air again. Well, as I was on my way up for the 3rd time, somebody down below calls out, "Whoa, don't he buck, though!" Oh, this is bucking. Well, I was not happy at being the recipient, but at least I was glad for the educational benefits there. As I was on my way up for the 4th time, somebody struck that beast from behind with a leather strap. And when I came back down, the genuine was gone. I dug myself up out of the street. Oh, I put one hand on my head, one hand on my belly, if I'd have been the owner of 16 hands, I would have had a place to put every one of them. I've never been so externally or internally or eternally jostled in my entire life. I made up my mind if the auctioneer's brother's funeral took place while I was anywhere on the face of the earth, I would postpone all other recreations and attend it. There were some mean men in Virginia City. Mean men. Oh. Listen, it was the game of billiards and a mean man which ruined my naturally sweet disposition. You see, I used to fancy myself as being a rather good billiards player in my youth. Whenever I was short of cash, all I had to do was go down to the local billiards parlor and look for an easy mark. Well, one day I was down there hanging out with the boys, and a stranger stumbled in, and I looked at him cautiously. He had bright red hair, had crossed eyes, buck teeth, was knock-kneed and pigeon-toed, had one leg longer than the other, and he looked at me and proposed that we play a game of billiards for $1. I said, all right. Well, he asked me to knock the balls around the table for a while so as he could get my gait. So I did. And after I had done so, he looked at me out of the corner of his good eye. And he says to me, I'll be perfectly fair with you. I'll play you left-handed. He was going to play me left-handed? Why, the effrontery of that young whippersnapper must not go unpunished. The bet was on, and the game began. He won the toss of the coin, so he got first break. And he promptly cleared the table. Left-handed. Took my dollar and walked out into the street. When I picked my jaw back up off the ground, I ran back out after him and I said, see here, hey, if you can play like that left-handed, I'd sure like to see you play right-handed. And he said, I can't, I'm a southpaw. Mean men in Virginia City. Mean men. Why, you know that there was actually a corporation of mean men in Virginia City at that time. They formed together a corporation just for the particular purpose of being mean. Well, these mean men were in the mining business. So they hired some poor unfortunate drifter to blast rock for them. Well, this poor unfortunate drifter drilled down into this rock as deep as he could, and then he filled that hole full of black powder, and then he was tamping it down with a crowbar, and he struck a spark, and it touched off a premature blast, and it blew him and the crowbar straight up in the air. It just went higher and higher. And well, pretty quick, you weren't no bigger than a boy. And then you went higher and higher. And then you weren't no bigger than the dog. And you got higher and higher. And then you weren't no bigger than a bee. You got higher and higher. Right out of sight. Pretty quick he started coming down again. First he wasn't no bigger than the bee. And then he got lower and lower, and then he wasn't no bigger than the dog. And then he went lower and lower, and then he was as big as a boy, and he came right down and he lit in the same spot, holding that crowbar, and he went right back to tamping that hole again. He wasn't gone no more than 2 minutes. Those mean men docked his pay for being away from the job. Well, I didn't make it rich in the mining business. So eventually I was looking for a job. I was very particular about the type of job I would accept. I didn't want to work. So I became a newspaper reporter. And eventually I landed a berth on the Sacramento Union as their special correspondent to the Sandwich Islands. Well, after a rough journey on a ship, we finally arrived at the Sandwich Islands. And, our first stop was Honolulu. I was naturally anxious to fully explore this dreamy, enchanted paradise. They told me the best way to do so was to hire a horse. A horse. I had some recent recollections of one horse I'd been acquainted with, and so I told them at the stables that I wanted a safe horse to a fast one. Yes, a safe horse. An excessively gentle horse. One with no spirit whatsoever. A lame one if they had such a thing. Well, the man showed me a creature that looked as if it wanted to lean up against something and think. So I chose him. He had as many fine points about him as any other horse, so I hung my hat on one of them behind the saddle, and I climbed aboard, and off we went. The first gate we came to, that horse steered into it, and then just stood there. I argued the case with him, but he resisted. Finally, he yielded to insult and abuse, and he backed out, and away we went again down the road, and he steered into another gate. We kept up this gate business for 13 out of 14 gates, with a tropical sun beating down on top of my bare head to the point I thought it was going to cave in. Well, eventually he gave up the gate business and went along peaceably enough, but so absorbed in meditation. No horse ever thought over anything as profoundly as this one. Pretty quick I began to wonder. I started to think this horse is planning some outrage. The more this thing preyed on my mind, the more unsettled I got. And finally I dismounted, went around front to see if I could see a wild look in his eye. Can't tell you what a relief it was to realize he was only asleep. So I climbed back aboard, and I jolted him, woke him up. He started into a convulsive trot, which consisted of 3 short steps and 1 long one, 3 short steps and 1 long one, much like the sweeping plunge of a ship in a storm, or like an earthquake. About noon, I whipped this animated trance down alongside of a stretch of sandy beach. Beautiful, beautiful sandy beach. And there I spied a bevy of nude young native women bathing in the sea. This was the sort of local color I was looking for my newspaper. And so I went down and sat down on their clothes. To keep them from being stolen. And I begged them to come out, for it seemed to me the sea was rising, and I was satisfied they were in some danger. But they just ignored me and went on with their sport. Swimming races and splashing and tumbling each other about. Oh, it was a beautiful sight. I stayed there for quite a while waiting because I intended to be very thorough for my report. But eventually I decided it was time to go, and when I turned around I looked and the horse was asleep again. Well, now this is singular. This is singular. It goes to show that there are some differences between the horse and the man. You cannot depend on a horse to gather news. And so I became a reporter. Didn't want to do it, but I couldn't find honest employment. When I got back to the States, I hired a hall and gave a lecture. I've never had to work a day since. That was when I was just a tad. I was very young. Younger than I shall ever be again. Now I'm old. Older than I ever was. You may have recently read in the newspapers that I have just been appointed to the board of directors of the Hartford Insurance Company. I want to tell you, it's given me a whole new outlook on accidents. I used to view them with dread, but now they're a curiosity. Why, I have seen entire families lifted right up out of poverty and into affluence by the simple boon of a broken leg. Oh, and I've seen nothing quite so seraphic as the look which comes into a freshly mutilated man's face as he feels into his vest pocket with his remaining hand and he finds his accident policy safe and sound. Oh, I tell you, there is nothing more beneficial than insurance. I have even collected several stories which I like to share with young people like you wherever I go because they are so educational. And I will do this now, and I trust you will use them as a beacon under your understanding and a lamp under your feet. This first accident is just terrible. My dear young friend, never handle firearms carelessly. The pain and suffering which have been caused by the heedless, though innocent handling of firearms by young people like yourselves is appalling, simply appalling. I remember one case just last summer. In the little summer home which adjoined my own in Hartford, there was a dear, sweet little old grandmother, one of the fairest spirits in the land. One day she was seated at her work, and her young grandson crept into the house behind her. And he got down from the mantelpiece an old battered musket, which had not been touched in years, and which he thought was not loaded. Laughing and joking, he pointed the gun at her, threatening to shoot her. Panic-stricken, she ran pleading and screaming towards the door, but as she passed him, he raised the muzzle and pulled the trigger. He had supposed that gun was not loaded. He was right, it wasn't. But that's the first case of that kind I've ever heard of. Why, listen. A youth who could not hit a cathedral at 30 yards with a Gatling gun could pick up an empty old musket and bag his grandmother every time. You be careful with empty old firearms. This next story took place when I was just a pup. Happened on the 4th of July. Happened to an old uncle of mine. Being filled with the spirit of patriotism, this old uncle opened his mouth to hurrah, and the rocket flew right down his throat. Before he could ask for a glass of water, it went off. Scattered him all over the county. Just trimmed him like a tree. Killed him. Very seriously. Why, listen, 3 days later, on the Atlantic seaboard, it started to rain buttons identifiable as his. Poor devil, he never had any life insurance. He was always sorry about it afterwards. But I say, let that be a lesson to him. Now, this next accident story. I hesitated because, you see, modesty forbids that I should. I was the hero of the story. For educational value alone, all right. I was walking along down the street in Hartford one day, and I heard a lot of commotion. So I walked around the corner to see what was going on, and I saw a very large building totally engulfed in flames, and dozens of people standing around watching her burn. And I looked up. Leaning out of a 4th-story window was an old man hanging out there pleading and screaming for help! For someone to save him! But nobody did anything. They all just stood there. Everybody but me. I called for a long length of rope. When it arrived, I threw one end of it up to the old man, and I instructed him to tie it around his waist. When he had done so, I pulled him down. On dark and stormy nights, I frequently pause from whatever it is I'm doing, gaze into the flames of my fireplace. I wonder what might have happened had I not been there that day. This next accident concerned an old friend of mine by the name of Dr. Tushmaker. What's so funny about that? He was a dentist. Dr. Tushmaker was. One day, I should point out, Dr. Tushmaker fancied himself to be quite an inventor. Oh, yes, yes. One day he had a patient come to him with a very bad toothache. Dr. Tushmaker sat him down in the dentist chair. And then he got the pliers. Then he latched on to the afflicted tooth. And he gave a mighty yank. But the tooth would not come out. And what's more, every time he yanked, the patient's right foot came up in the air. What did you do that for? Because I can't help it, that's why. You come back to me in 1 week, and I'll take care of you good. So the patient went away with the tooth hurting worse than ever. During that week, Dr. Tushmaker set to work feverishly in the workshop. And he invented a contraption that utilized the properties of the lever, the screw, the wedge, the hammer, the block and tackle, the inclined plane, and the steam engine. At the end of the week, the patient came back. The tooth was just killing him. Dr. Tushmaker sat him down in the dentist chair, and this time, instead of the pliers, he attached this new apparatus to the afflicted tooth. And then he gave a yank on the lever, and out popped the tooth. Its roots were attached to the patient's right big toe. And his entire skeleton was extracted. Had to carry him home in a pillowcase. You might think that story had a sad ending. Had a happy ending for both parties. You see, the patient had always suffered from arthritis. That was cured. What's more, it became quite notorious and well known throughout the territory. Made a lot of money. A lot of money. See, every time a circus came through his town, he hired himself out as the India rubber man. Became well known throughout the whole territory. Became so well known. Why, listen, he even married the governor's daughter. What do you think of that? Didn't work out very long. She left him. Said he was spineless. And as for Dr. Tushmaker, he died a millionaire. You see, he sold the patent to that machine in a smaller version to a string of coast-to-coast restaurants who used them back in their kitchens for deboning turkeys. That's a true story. I'm not lying to you. I'm not like George Washington. George could not tell a lie. I can, but I won't. I have just one more accident story to share with you before I go. It came to my attention just about 2 weeks ago. I was lecturing at a banquet in Hartford, and after I was done lecturing, I was milling around among the crowd. Sometimes you can get a compliment or two that way. I ran into an old boyhood chum of mine. I hadn't seen him for 40 or 50 or 500 years, seemed like. He introduced me to his third wife. Then, quite innocently in the conversation, it came out that his previous 2 wives had both died violent deaths. I said, "Oh, that's terrible. That's terrible, old friend. What happened to the first wife?"
She died of food poisoning. She ate poison mushrooms.
Oh, that's terrible, old chum, just terrible. What happened to the second wife?
She died of a fractured skull.
Terrible. How awful. What happened? Did the buggy tip over on her? No. She wouldn't eat her mushrooms. Another true story. Well, now it is time to go. My feet are tired, and you're tired too, I'll bet. I came in 1835 with Halley's Comet. Coming again pretty soon. I expect to go out with it. It'll be the biggest disappointment of my life if I do not go out with Halley's Comet. The Almighty has said, no doubt,
Now here are these 2 indefinable freaks of nature. They came in together, they must go out together.
I'm looking forward to it. You've been a marvelous audience, ladies and gentlemen. Perhaps someday your children or your grandchildren or your great-grandchildren will find a warm place for me in their hearts, such as you have here for me this evening. Perhaps they too will find, like I hope that you have found, that the reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated. Thank you for your attention, and good night.
they prepare to leave for California. Would also invite you to come back on May the 20th as Larry Cantwell will be doing his rendition of Mark Twain on May the 20th at 8 o'clock in this auditorium, and hope that you could come back. We appreciate your attendance this evening. We're mighty pleased with the contributions the Front Porch Majority makes to our high school and for all of the time and effort